On April 14, 1999, a horrific double murder took place in the quiet city of Hikari, located in Yamaguchi Prefecture, Japan. The brutal killings of Yayoi Mamura, 29, and her 11-month-old daughter Yuka would send shockwaves through the nation, creating widespread outrage and raising serious questions about Japan's legal and mental health systems. The perpetrator of this gruesome crime was an 18-year-old named Takayuki Atsuki, whose chilling motives and lack of remorse stunned both the public and law enforcement alike. The evening began like any other for 23-year-old Hiroshi Mamura, a husband and father, returning home from a long day of work. He entered the family home around 7 p.m., expecting the usual sounds of his wife, Yayoi, and their baby daughter, Yuka. But instead, an eerie silence greeted him. The door, which was always securely locked by his wife, was wide open. A sense of dread crept over him as he stepped inside, calling out for his family. What he discovered was nothing short of a nightmare. The house, usually neat and orderly, was in disarray. It looked as if someone had intentionally disturbed the calm, but there were no signs of struggle at first. As he moved through the house, Hiroshi called for his wife, but there was no answer. Fear began to grip him, and his heart pounded as he checked each room. But it wasn't until he opened the bedroom wardrobe that he came upon the most horrifying sight of all. There, hidden behind a blanket, lay the lifeless body of his wife, Yayoi. She had been wrapped in a blanket and left to die in a disturbing fashion. Hiroshi collapsed in shock, his body unable to process the sight before him. He managed to call the police, who arrived within the next half hour. What they discovered next was even more chilling. His baby daughter, Yuka, was found stuffed into a black plastic bag, hidden on top of a storage cabinet. Hiroshi was left devastated, standing in the wreckage of his home, unable to comprehend the brutality of the crime that had been carried out in his absence. 4 days after the murder, police successfully tracked down the suspect, 18-year-old Takayuki Atsuki, a local teenager. He was arrested at an internet cafe near the crime scene, casually playing video games, showing no signs of guilt or fear. Atsuki's arrest shocked the community, as he was a seemingly ordinary young man with no prior criminal history. Takayuki Atsuki was born on March 15, 1981, in a middle-class family. Growing up, he had no known behavioral issues or signs of violent tendencies, which made his crime all the more shocking. However, his growing obsession with video games, particularly violent ones, was seen as a contributing factor to his eventual descent into madness. He often spent hours immersed in virtual worlds, where the line between reality and fantasy seemed to blur. This detachment from reality would play a critical role in his crime. Atsuki had no apparent relationship with the Mamura family prior to the murders. He had recently posed as a plumber, claiming that the Mamuras needed a repair. At around 2:00 p.m. on April 14th, he showed up at their house, carrying tools and presenting himself as a legitimate tradesman. Once inside, he attacked Yayoi, immediately overpowering her despite her attempts to fight back. In a desperate effort to escape, Yayoi screamed and struggled, but she was ultimately subdued by Atsuki's violent force. Once Yayoi was incapacitated, he bound her mouth and nose with tape, suffocating her in an agonizing death. The infant, Yuka, who witnessed her mother's murder, was next. Atsuki feared that the baby's cries would attract attention from the neighbors. In a horrifying display of cruelty, he removed the child from the area twice, each time returning her to a more secluded space. Finally, he used a rope to strangle the defenseless baby, ending her life. After the murders, Atsuki showed no remorse. He didn't flee the scene or attempt to cover his tracks. Instead, he went to an internet cafe, where he spent the rest of the afternoon playing video games, seemingly unaffected by the brutal crime he had just committed. The police investigation into the murders began immediately after Hiroshi Mamura's harrowing discovery. The scene was examined by forensic experts who quickly began piecing together the details of the crime. The disarray of the house indicated that the attack had been swift and violent. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Atsuki had been let inside by the victims, trusting him because of his unassuming appearance. The forensic team conducted an extensive search of the house, finding traces of blood in several rooms, as well as fingerprints on the tape used to suffocate Yayoi. The most shocking discovery was the positioning of the victims' bodies, which seemed to suggest that Atsuki had planned the murders in advance, with the intention of carrying out his violent fantasy. The absence of defensive wounds on Yayoi indicated that she had been caught off guard, reinforcing the theory that Takayuki had prepared for this crime. Witnesses in the area reported seeing a young man matching Atsuki's description near the house around the time of the murders, confirming his presence at the scene. His arrest at the internet cafe sealed his fate, and he was soon charged with the brutal killings. As the investigation deepened, police learned more about Takayuki Atsuki's psychological state. Despite his outwardly normal upbringing, he had become increasingly withdrawn as he entered adolescence. His obsession with violent video games was seen as one possible factor in his eventual spiral into madness. Atsuki was particularly fixated on the idea of resurrection, an obsession that led to his belief that he could bring the dead back to life through violent acts. His delusional thinking grew worse over time, culminating in the murder of the Mamura family. Atsuki's trial revealed a deeply disturbed individual, disconnected from reality. In his defense, his lawyers argued that his obsession with fantasy and violent video games had affected his mental state, making it difficult for him to understand the consequences of his actions. Despite these claims, Atsuki showed no remorse for the killings. He even claimed that his sexual act with the deceased body of Yayoi was part of a resurrection ritual he believed would bring her back to life. He further explained that the positioning of Yuka's body was inspired by a bizarre fantasy involving a cartoon character. His complete lack of empathy and understanding for the gravity of his crime left the courtroom in stunned silence. The public reaction to the Hikari murders was one of outrage and disbelief. Many were horrified not just by the brutality of the crime, but by the fact that Takayuki Atsuki, at just 18 years old, would receive special legal protections as a minor under Japanese law. The trial sparked a nationwide debate about the treatment of juveniles in Japan's justice system. Should minors who commit such heinous acts be treated differently from adults, especially when their actions are so cold and premeditated? In the courtroom, Takayuki's bizarre and chilling testimony, combined with his lack of remorse, left the public questioning whether Japan's legal system was equipped to handle such extreme cases of juvenile crime. As his trial progressed, the Yamaguchi District Prosecutor's Office demanded the death penalty for Takayuki, citing the brutality and senseless nature of the murders. But the law was clear since he was under 20 years old at the time of the crime. Takayuki was not eligible for the death penalty. This loophole in Japan's legal system led to an outpouring of frustration and anger from the public. The final verdict in Takayuki's trial shocked the nation. Despite the gravity of his crime, he was sentenced to a prison term of 7 to 8 years, a sentence that many felt was far too lenient for such a brutal act of violence. Public outrage reached a boiling point, and many people began to question the fairness and adequacy of Japan's juvenile justice system. In the wake of the trial, Hiroshi Mamura, the grieving father who had lost both his wife and child, became a vocal advocate for change in Japan's legal system. His heartbreak was compounded by the realization that his family's murderer would not face the full consequences of his actions. In an emotional press conference, Hiroshi expressed his outrage, declaring that if Takayuki Atsuki were ever released from prison, he would take matters into his own hands. Hiroshi's plea for justice resonated deeply with the public, sparking a national conversation about the rights of victims and the need for reforms in the juvenile justice system. Even Japan's Prime Minister, Keizo Obuchi, acknowledged the concerns raised by the case and promised to examine the flaws in the legal system that had allowed Takayuki to escape a harsher punishment. Despite Hiroshi's tireless efforts, the case highlighted a deeply entrenched issue in Japan's legal system, one that still lingers today. The Hikari murders remain a haunting reminder of the need for change in the treatment of juvenile offenders and the importance of ensuring that justice is truly served for the victims of such horrific crimes. The Hikari murders, committed by Takayuki Atsuki, not only shocked Japan, but also ignited a profound national debate on juvenile justice, mental health, and the flaws in the country's legal system. Atsuki's brutal crime, coupled with his chilling psychological profile and disturbing lack of remorse, left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of the nation. The case raised critical questions about how the justice system should handle offenders, especially those deemed to be juveniles under Japanese law. Initially sentenced to life imprisonment by a district court in 2000, Atsuki's age played a key role in the leniency of his sentence, as he was considered a juvenile under Japan's Juvenile Act. This decision was met with widespread public outrage, particularly from Hiroshi Mamura, the grieving father who had lost his wife and child in the brutal attack. Hiroshi's impassioned plea for justice resonated deeply with the public, leading to his own public vow of vengeance if Atsuki were ever released. The case continued to unfold, with the Hiroshima High Court upholding the original life sentence in 2002, despite an appeal by the prosecution. This decision only further fueled the anger and frustration of those who felt that justice had not been served. The legal system seemed to fail not just Hiroshi, but the memory of the victims Yayoi and Yuka Mamura. In a significant turn, the case was taken up by Japan's Supreme Court in 2006. It was here that the court acknowledged the flaws in the original ruling, noting that the rationale for avoiding the death penalty had been insufficient. In a groundbreaking decision, the High Court overturned the previous sentence in 2008, handing down a death sentence for Takayuki Atsuki. The judges ruled that the gravity of his crime warranted the ultimate punishment, despite his age at the time of the murders. Justice Seishi Kanet Suki, in his ruling, stated that Atsuki's criminal responsibility was so severe that the court could not allow him to evade the consequences of his actions. Atsuki's troubled past, marked by abuse at the hands of his father and the suicide of his mother, was considered during the trial, but it was ultimately clear that the court deemed his actions as being beyond the limits of juvenile leniency. In the end, his path to justice was long and turbulent, with many questioning the fairness of a system that allowed a juvenile to escape the full weight of the law for so many years. Hiroshi Mamura's tireless advocacy and the eventual change in Atsuki's sentence stand as a poignant reminder of the resilience of victims' families in their fight for justice. The case also serves as a lasting reflection on the importance of reform within the juvenile justice system and the need for a legal framework that balances the protection of minors with the accountability they must face for their crimes. The Hikari murders remain a dark chapter in Japan's criminal history, one that continues to provoke conversations about justice, empathy, and the consequences of violent actions. This concludes the case of Takayuki Atsuki, Hikari Murders. Feel free to share your thoughts and opinions about this shocking story in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. It will help us bring you more impactful content. See you in the next video.